Okay, let's dive right into this explainer where we're going to rigorously unpack Chapter 19 of Nāgārjuna's Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. Now, I know many of you joining us are already deeply familiar with this systematic deconstruction of causality that we've been exploring in the preceding chapters. We've dismantled the inherent existence of cause and effect, right? But what usually happens next is the conceptual mind tries to retreat. It looks for a final refuge in the background scaffolding of the universe. We kind of tend to think, well, okay, even if causal mechanisms are empty, surely the container in which they happen must be real. So today, we're going to really take our time, leave absolutely no details skipped, and apply our most stringent Madhyamaka reasoning to deconstruct the very bedrock of that container. We're going after time, space, and things. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The three conventional triads. 2. The tetralemma deconstruction. 3. Emptiness and interdependent co-origination. 4. Union of the two truths. And 5. Abiding in the middle way. So let's jump straight into section 1, the three conventional triads, identifying our models of reality. Step 1 of our analytical engine means we really need to meticulously identify our targets. What exactly are we deconstructing? We are looking at 3 specific triads that essentially make up our conventional model of reality. First step is the triad of time, which we naturally categorize as past, present, and future. Second is a triad of space, defined by coordinates like highest, middle, and lowest. And finally, the foundational metatriad of thing, space, and time. Conventionally, human cognition reifies all of these categories. We just assume they possess this inherent independent existence. We treat space like an absolute fixed empty box, time as a static, linear flow, and things as the solid entities that just sit inside of them. So by isolating these 3 triads, we've set up the exact conceptual targets that Nāgārjuna is about to systematically demolish. Moving right along to section 2, the tetralemma deconstruction, unleashing the analytical engine. For step 2, we're applying the relentless logic of the tetralemma to demonstrate that in each of these 3 triads, the opposites just cannot possibly hold up to ultimate analysis. We have to thoroughly test every single permutation here. Think about it. Can the segments of time or space be completely dependent on one another, or are they entirely independent? Can they be inherently existent or completely non-existent? Are they fundamentally different or exactly identical? Separate or united? Multiple or one? Dual or non-dual? Nāgārjuna brilliantly reveals that adopting any of these extreme positions inevitably leads straight to contradiction and absurdity. If they're completely independent and separate, they can never interact, which completely destroys any causal continuum. If they're perfectly identical or united, well then the distinctions of time and space collapse into a frozen singularity. And trying to say it's both or neither certainly doesn't resolve the paradox either. Let's actually look at the verses in detail to see exactly how this engine operates. Starting with verse 1 and the triad of time, we conventionally assume that the present and the future depend sequentially on a fixed past, right? But Nāgārjuna exposes a massive contradiction here. If the present and the future truly depend on the past for their inherent identity, they must already reside there, within the past. However, if the present and the future are fundamentally existent in the past, time becomes entirely simultaneous. It's totally frozen. This completely shatters our conventional model of linear time flowing smoothly from one distinct period to the next. Now we move to verses 2 and 3, which beautifully close the logical trap. If, to avoid that previous absurdity, we try to claim that the present and future do not exist in the past, we run into a fatal new flaw. How could they possibly be dependent upon it? If the segments of time are completely separate, distinct, and multiple, there's absolutely no bridge between them. There is no causal continuum whatsoever. Because an independent present cannot relate to an independent past, a fluid sequential time cannot even be conceptually grasped. Therefore, as verse 3 concludes, the segments of time do not inherently exist. Time just completely collapses as an absolute framework. And Nāgārjuna uses the exact same rigorous tetralemma phrasing in verse 4 to deconstruct the spatial triad. Absolute spatial distinctions like highest, middle, and lowest completely fail the test of being different, identical, both, or neither. If highest and lowest are inherently different and separate, they share zero spatial relation, making a unified concept of space completely impossible. On the flip side, if they are identical or united, there is no spatial extension, no dimension at all. So, just like time, the triad of space is utterly logically incoherent the moment we try to establish it as an inherent absolute coordinate system. Finally, in verse 6, Nāgārjuna targets that overarching meta-triad. He demonstrates that time and space cannot possess inherent existence because they depend entirely on things. Time is really just a measurement of change in things, and space is a measurement of extension between things. But as we've conclusively proven in previous chapters, things themselves entirely lack inherent existence, and since there are no inherently existing things at all, how on earth can time or space exist? This brings us to step 3 of our analysis. We have to conclude that these 3 opposites of each triad, past, present, future, highest, middle, lowest, and thing, space, time, are entirely empty of inherent existence. They are never absolute. Let's look at section 3, emptiness and interdependent co-origination, the functional illusion. Having reduced these absolutes to 0, we move to step 4 to understand how they actually function relatively. We conclude that the 3 opposites of each of these triads are completely inseparable. They are dependently co-originated. They're profoundly interdependent, co-defined, co-emergent, and co-evolving. There is simply no time and space without things, and conversely, there are no things without space and time. They completely rely on each other to even be conceptualized. Because of this, they are entirely co-imputed by the mind. They are mere designations, just names. They are conventional truths and conventional tools, utterly lacking any solid independent core. Because they are completely co-imputed and lack any inherent essence, we really have to recognize a profound shift in how we understand phenomena. For step 6, we can conclude that the 3 opposites of each of these triads are like illusions, reflections, mirages, dreams, or echoes. They are functionally there, yet not there. This is a huge contrast to our conventional reification, which constantly hallucinates these rigid inherent building blocks of the universe. In Madhyamaka reality, the triads we use to navigate existence are merely functional illusions. They're totally valid for localized interaction, sure, but they dissolve the moment you apply ultimate analysis. On to section 4, union of the 2 truths, beyond conceptual proliferation. This realization points directly to the profound union of the 2 truths regarding the 3 opposites of each triad. This is step 5. We do not fall into nihilism by rejecting conventional reality altogether. The union of the 2 truths acknowledges that while time, space, and things are entirely empty of inherent existence, they arise precisely because of that emptiness. They are relatively useful conventions. They allow us to communicate, schedule our days, and navigate our physical reality, but we must deeply understand they are never absolute. Their conventional functioning and their ultimate emptiness are not at odds with each other. They are perfectly unified. Now in step 7, we strip away even our most refined philosophical frameworks, using the generalized tetralemma. We affirm that the 3 opposites of each triad are not this, they are not non-this, they are not both, and they are not neither, and there is no 5th option for whatever this is. This powerfully demonstrates that reality is completely beyond all of our conditioned, dualistic conceptual proliferations. It's beyond all of our models, whether mathematical, physical, or linguistic. The true nature of phenomena simply cannot be captured by the binary constraints of conceptual thought. Finally, section 5, abiding in the middle way, the praxis of suchness. So, what does this all mean for us? How do we actually apply this ontology as practitioners? Steps 9 and 10 guide our praxis. Step 9 concludes that the absolute best attitude toward these models of reality is walking the middle way. That means remaining entirely free from all extremes, like this or non-this, as well as free from any middles, such as both or neither. Step 10 instructs us that we absolutely can and should use these triads conventionally and relatively. They're incredibly useful tools. However, we must never use them in absolute terms. We must use them without attachment, without reification, without grasping effort, and without absolutes, utilizing them smoothly while intimately knowing their true empty nature. When we view existence through this lens, we observe a continuous, timeless, fractal cycle. We create and impute forms and concepts interdependently. Then, we fall into bondage by violently reifying and attaching to these illusory structures, treating them as absolute truths. And we experience awakening by penetrating their absolute reality, realizing their functional emptiness, and finally finding freedom. Yet, we have to remember, even this beautiful conceptual cycle of creation, bondage, and awakening is itself just another interdependent formulation. It remains an imperfect model of reality, not reality itself. Which brings us to our 11th and final step. Having completely deconstructed the absolute fabric of the universe, the only logical conclusion is that all elements of our model of reality, causality, time, space, and things, are all empty of inherent existence. They are inseparable, interdependent, co-defined, co-evolving, and co-imputed by the mind. They are mere designations and conventional tools, not inherently existent, not completely non-existent, not both, and not neither. They are functional emptiness. They are an imperfect model of reality, not reality as it is. Knowing this, we might as well perceive everything as primordially equal, pure, perfect, complete, divine, one, whether many, one, both, or neither, and simply abide in reality exactly as it is, in suchness. The question is, can you drop your imperfect models and just rest in that?